Well, g'day T. How are we?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's episode 14.
I
Is
know
that
that's
craziness?
I know that is craziness, isn't it? That's months and months we've been doing this now.
It is, and those last three episodes that we dropped in one weekend. We certainly had a lot of traffic through with people listening to that and engaging in the conversation, didn't we?
Yeah, definitely downloads in the hundreds for each episode, which is pretty cool.
It was very, very cool, and our audience is certainly growing. We've got people, lots and lots of listeners in Australia and also the States and lots of other spatterings across Europe. And I always love to look at those countries where we've got one or two listeners like Poland and Latvia and
Yes,
Lithuania. I feel like
Latvia.
Latvia,
Yeah,
I just feel it's almost like votes in Eurovision. Latvia usually get less votes.
yeah, right. But they do fucking amazing liverwurst in Latvia.
Mate, everyone loves it.
When I was in high school, man, I used to work in the deli at Coles, and Latvian liverwurst was one of the things we sold. But yeah, it's growing and it's amazing, and I'm really thrilled. The other thing I think I wanted to point out was that the Facebook group is coming alive, and we've got some personalities turning up in there, and people having their say. And I think it would be good to make a point that just because we do or don't respond doesn't mean we are for or against what's being said.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to maintain that environment of healing and going forward rather than, we don't want to be bagging people out too much. I mean, there's obviously the naming of a few characters that we've come across in our time, but we certainly don't want to be looking back and throwing stones at everyone for sure.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, mate, why don't you tell us what we're talking about today?
Episode 14, we are going to talk about the prosperity doctrine, often referred to as the hyperfaith movement, and many, many other names, which some of them aren't as complimentary. It's an interesting space, and it's something that both T and I have certainly come across, been involved in, been observers, but also been in the middle of it, and bloody hell, it's a weird space. It is an incredibly weird space. We got quite a few little stories to tell, haven't we, T?
Yeah, exactly right. I think it's important to note that we are not going to necessarily theologically deconstruct this because, you and I both think, hey, to each his own. If you want to believe that, you can believe that. But we'll tell our stories and say this is how it messed us up.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm happy to kick off on this one. I mean, I came across this doctrine quite early in my faith journey, and it was in an early church that I was involved in, and they had this guy come out who was quite a big name, John Avanzini. He, I can't remember. Can you remember the names of some of his books? It was like Unanswered
No.
Prayer, 30, 60, 100-fold, things like that. Everything was about claiming and prosperity.
Yeah, and I think in the early 90s to mid 90s, maybe not quite in the mid 90s, but the early 90s, he was definitely a big name. He was up there with Copeland and Kenneth Copeland and these others. I don't know if he's still around or if he's still doing stuff, but definitely back then he was a big name, wasn't he?
He was, and he is around. I can confirm that. So I Googled him the other day when I was just preparing for this podcast and thinking, I wonder what he's doing, and he's still around. So I don't know how often he speaks. He's quite old now. I don't know his age, but he'd be certainly getting on in years. So, but he came to this church, and it was quite surprising. The church wasn't a big one. It was maybe 150, 200 people. Fairly, it had grown very fast. They had this guy come along, and he was dripping in gold. Like, he was your typical televangelist, and I remember that we were told to prepare for miracles. We were prepared to prepare for big things that were going to happen. Those that had debts come along because there's a good chance those debts will be gone after you come to these meetings. Now, this one meeting, I remember he preached for like 3 or 4 nights in a row, and he had full church every night. And this one night, my parents had only become Christians probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months before, and they had come into the space very open, and they were told to bring, along with the rest of the church, bring your mortgages along, Bring your car loans along. Bring your loans, your hire purchase, whatever it is. Put it in to a manila folder. Give it to John Evanzini with a generous gift, and he'll pray over it. And no need to pay any more of those payments for those loans because they'll be gone. So no worries, just take care of it and move on. And I remember,
so you're saying with a generous gift. I know you sort of went over that really quickly. So people had to put money into these requests or whatever you want to call them.
Look, it wasn't mandatory, but it was strongly encouraged. And I remember the offerings that were taken up for those. I was watching people put fistful of notes in the offering, which was all going to John Evanzini. So it was very, very clear that people really should give, because if you're not going to be generous, how can you expect to be given back 30, 60, 100-fold? Was it pressed down, shaken together, flowing over? They were the sort of scriptures that were just being banded around and being told that that's fact. You give, you'll get 30, 60, 100-fold back.
So what did he do? Like he would stand up and start preaching, or like how did it all work?
Yeah, he did, and it was seriously like watching a televangelist, which was quite entertaining because he was a televangelist, but it was a live show. So he would get up, but everything was about, Jesus died so you could be rich. Jesus died so you could be wealthy, you could live, and those who believed in Jesus, the fact was, you could be rich. Like, he rarely talked about grace, about love. I can't recall any specific details around that, but the whole thing for me was shrouded in the fact that it was around becoming prosperous, becoming materially wealthy. It was nothing to do with your character, with love, with grace.
Yeah, well, that's what they call it, the prosperity doctrine or the prosperity gospel, don't they? Because it's not a gospel of salvation, except from salvation from poverty, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I really, I struggled with it, but I tried to get on board because, I was relatively new in the faith, as I said, and I was told that this is what you did. I fortunately didn't have any loans or anything at that time, but I saw people bring their mortgages along. I saw people bring their loan documents along and pass them out the front for John Evanzini to pray over. He would just pray over this whole pile. He would claim it for Jesus, say it's gone. Don't worry about your payments next week. Just move on. So what happened practically, I have no idea. Like, did people then just not pay their mortgages and the bank was chasing them? Did it impact them that they thought they just didn't believe enough? Because you were told that you had to believe enough. You had to have enough faith, whatever that meant. God only knows what that meant, but you had to have enough faith.
But you would have had a car loan then, wouldn't you? You were working as a tradesman.
Yeah.
Did you stop paying your?
No, I didn't have a car loan actually. I got a car loan after that when I went to Great Big AOG and my car wasn't good enough. So I felt the pressure to get a new car when I was there. But I didn't have a loan, but I certainly got into the whole if I believe more, then I'll be wealthier.
Yeah, did you give money?
Oh yeah, I gave a lot of money. The whole tithing of 10% of your earnings went well beyond that. I can't remember what I gave, but I remember giving well above what I could afford and certainly left myself short. And I remember thinking, maybe my faith wasn't good enough because
of course,
I didn't get any prosperity back from that, any wealth back from that. All I got was a gift for John Evanzini.
I think he had a book or a tape series or something, and I'm pretty sure, I didn't Google this beforehand, but I think it was called It's Not Working, Brother, or It's Not Working, Brother John, or something like that. He had a book that was basically saying, because people were coming to him, afterwards and going, it's not working. And I'm pretty sure he put out a book called that or something like that. But you've talked to me about this church in particular, and as a matter of fact, you've talked to us, right, that are listening to you, and you said this was the church that was kind of more accepting and loving, and you left there to go to Great Big AOG. That was the independent one. So how did all this fit with that?
It didn't. That was a really weird thing. They were always very Pentecostal. There was no doubt about that. But there was definitely an acceptance and a love and a real grace shown within that space. So it did seem to be out of sync with where they were going. But it was quite a journey that they actually kept going along. So they had a building fund. They had moved out of a rented premises. They had bought this large property in a relatively affluent part of the city, in the suburbs, and it had a warehouse on it, an old warehouse. So typical Pentecostal church, turned that warehouse into a church. To do that, it obviously took money. So I can't remember how much the aim was for the building fund, but they called upon members to make a commitment over a time period of, I think it was a couple of years, where you would say, okay, I'll give $5,000. I'll pay it down almost like a loan, and just give that to the church. They were really clear that if you did that, you committed to it, it was your next step in your faith. It was much more than your normal tithing. So you would get more back.
Over and above the tithing.
Yeah. So it definitely wasn't, it wasn't about giving for the sake of giving because you wanted to make the world a better place or do something different or to contribute to community. It was very much peppered with, look, give, it's going to help us out, but you're going to get bucket loads more back and you are going to be prosperous. I remember I was only about 19 at this time, and I remember being quite pressured to commit to this. And I thought, I can't commit to this. I'm living week to week as it is. So I don't think the church was getting enough people committing, so they started to make home visits. So they would send their ministry teams around who were for the, connected to the building fund, and they would come around and ask you to commit to it. But the pressure from that was phenomenal. I remember being told at that time, someone came around and they said, we need you to determine how much you're going to give. I said, I can't determine that. I don't know. And they said, go away and pray. I thought I'd be given a couple of days. I was given 5 minutes. So I was told to go to another room, go and pray, seek guidance, and come back with a number. I didn't know how that worked. I went away. I prayed. I came back and I said, I've got no idea. And so they started throwing numbers at me. 5,000? No, I said, I can't afford 5,000. 3,000? No. So it fell on a couple of thousand in the end that I ended up committing. And you essentially had a ledger that you would contribute and they would knock that amount off your ledger. My parents also got pressured into giving as well. So they had, I don't know how much they got committed to them, but I can tell you within 12 months, they had paid that building off. So they had obviously got significant contributions from people.
Yeah, I could imagine some of the language, that would have been used, and if not used, it certainly was in other churches. And it's things like a faith pledge, planting a seed, all that kind of stuff. I think it's really interesting listening to you that it's not about missions. It's not about saving souls. No. It's not about, like you said, it's not about, working with kids on the street or the poor or anything like that. It's just give so you will get.
Absolutely, and building a property portfolio. This property was beautiful. There's no doubt. The pastor lived on the premises as well, so this paid for the refurbishment of his house as well because it was all part of the one property.
So did this happen after John Avanzini or before?
After, from memory. So okay. It was a flow on from it. So I'm sure that it was a challenge set by the leadership. It was like, all right, if we've committed to this this prosperity doctrine, then let's try and make it work. And there's enough you can do with a bit of marketing and pressure. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure. I first came across the faith movement stuff after the Revival Centre, because the Revival Centre doesn't like anyone that's not Revival Centre, right? So we weren't really exposed, except you'd hear words like names like Smith Wigglesworth and this kind of stuff, who, fairness to good old Smith, he probably wasn't a prosperity preacher, but he's certainly a word of faith preacher. But I remember the same people that were sort of helping me out gave me some Kenneth Hagin books. That was the guy who I was first introduced to, was Kenneth Hagin. And
Daddy
it was mixed.
Hagin.
Daddy Hagen, yeah, Granddaddy Hagen. And also I remember another friend of mine used to call him Dr. Hagen. He used to talk about Dr. Hagen says, as if, somehow this guy was some sort of academic. But obviously he wasn't. He probably got his PhD from his own Bible college, or maybe even from the bottom of the Lucky Charms box. But his stuff was mixed in with that taking authority, demons, all that. So it was definitely a big chunk of the faith and prosperity, but it was also mixed in with healing, mixed in with taking authority over the devil and casting out demons. So I was reading all this stuff prior to, my whole deliverance and all that. That was definitely fed by Kenneth Hagin, because Kenneth Hagin used to talk about the little monkey demons on his shoulders, and Jesus used to talk to him all the time. He'd write in his books, the Lord appeared to me and said this and said that. So yeah, that's where I started. I started with the whole sort of Kenneth Hagin thing. And then when I got involved with Great Big AOG, it was definitely permeated everywhere. But Great Big AOG, I don't know if you remember, they never really stood up and said, watch Kenneth Copeland or read Kenneth Hagin books or anything like that. It was there, but they didn't ever really put their rubber stamp on it.
No, I agree. But there was definitely pockets of people who promoted it more strongly than the others within Great Big AOG. But I agree, it was never said from the pulpit.
Yeah. Well, I dated this girl later on who I had a massive crush on, and she was right into it, and her family were right into it. I mean, like on a whole nother level, brother. I mean, they were just out there with this whole faith stuff, and I was right into her. So that sort of led me back into it, and even to the point where I was at Bible college at that stage, and Kenneth Copeland came to Australia and did a series of crusades or whatever he called them. And I skipped Bible college for the whole week. People were claiming to be healed and all that. And it was all about being wealthy. But it was also very much, from a Kenneth Copeland's perspective, it was also very much about being healed.
Yep.
And also about signs and wonders as well.
And taking victory.
Oh, yes. Well, Believers, A Voice of Victory was the name of his TV show, which I used to record every morning on Channel 9 onto VHS and then wake up later and watch it back. Him and Gloria. Praise God, I tell you. Him and Gloria, they used to move my heart, brother, I tell you.
And for those on our Facebook page, you would have seen that T posted the Kenneth Copeland video this week where Kenneth Copeland was claiming victory over COVID-19. And it's a rather passionate victory speech, isn't it?
Why don't we have a listen to it right now, and we'll just play a little snippet of that. And then people can also visit on the Facebook and see the whole thing, but let's have a listen to that.
Standing in the office of the prophet of God, I execute judgment on you, COVID-19. I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer. You get out, we break your power, you get off this nation. I demand judgment on you. I demand a vaccination to come immediately.
Yes.
That certainly is confronting.
Yes. Did you notice he takes authority, right? I take authority, you COVID, I tell you. I love it. Could I tell you, as much as it's confronting, as much as it's offensive, I love it. It's like going to Disneyland for church. It's brilliant.
It is. And I do love the little echo voice at the back, the guy who's standing to his side, who every now and then gives him a little bit of affirmation.
Yes. And do you remember there was also, not that we're going to get into this, but there was also that one where he and Rodney Howard-Browne were talking to each other in tongues. Yeah, that was another good one. Actually, why don't I play that as well, because that's a bit of fun too.
I think that clip, wasn't that part of the whole Pensacola, Brownsville or whatever movement?
Yeah, Toronto Blessing and all that kind of thing. Yeah. But they're fun, aren't they? They're a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Disturbing, though. I remember that one was bizarre, and by then I had definitely started to question a lot more than I already had, and for me, that was a bit of a tipping point. That one, I just went, what the actual fuck?
Yeah. I was way out of the whole faith movement thing by the time that came along. And that was just, Looney Tunes. I can remember when I was right into it, there was a like a multiple sclerosis charity was selling tickets for a for a car in a shopping center. And so the car was there. And so I went along, laid hands on the car and claimed it in Jesus' name. Didn't buy a ticket. Right. Didn't buy a ticket because, see, it's about faith, right? Not about tickets. Mm-hmm. So I laid hands on this Mercedes, spoke out in Jesus' name, took authority, claimed it, yada, yada. No, I didn't win it.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize that you had to be in it to win it, I guess.
I mean, let's be honest, it comes down to your lack of faith.
Well, there's that, and the fact that the emperor has no clothes. I mean, even to look back now and sort of, even to tell that story is just, oh gosh, I feel like a fool. But that's how real it was. I was really thinking I'm going to get this car.
Oh, absolutely. The whole blab it and grab it, they used to call it. I saw many people do that. I claimed things. There was no doubt I claimed things. There was, it's what I did a couple of times, but when it didn't work, yeah, sure, I looked at myself, got a bit introspective and went, maybe it's your lack of faith. I think all in all, it just went, I don't think that's what it's all about. It's a little bit weird, but I tell you what, this person is related to me who used to go and lay hands on everything, and you would be in the car with them and they would be claiming cars that drove past, and they would break out in tongues and they would be claiming stuff. You would be walking past things. They'd be laying hands on it and claiming it. They once rented a house, and I remember them claiming that house for them and that it would be theirs mortgage free. The person would give it to them. Hot tip, it didn't happen.
Spoiler alert.
I know, spoiler alert. Yeah, stay tuned, people. Gets better. But they were a single parent. What really wanted, they weren't doing that well financially, really wanted to take their kids on a holiday. And to be honest, I need to backtrack. The reason they weren't doing well financially, they'd sold a house and given every single cent away. This was back in the early 90s, and it was close on $100,000. And $100,000 back then could buy you a house outright. They had given it away along with all the things that they had bought with that payout because they believed that they would get it back 30, 60, 100-fold.
So they gave it to a faith preacher directly, or how did that work?
No, gave it to people as well, gave it to people they knew that were struggling. They definitely gave a lot to the church they were involved in. And it all went. So they were in a place where I'm thinking, oh God, I'd really love to take my kids on a holiday. What will we do? Well, we'll believe for it. How will we do it? We'll drive out to the nearest airport with the kids, put the car in the long-term car park, and just sit there and wait in the terminal and pray until someone comes up and gives you airline tickets and accommodation for you to go on a holiday.
Spoiler alert, how did that work out?
Let's just say they didn't have a holiday, except for about 14 hours at the airport. And they, the poor kids, completely distressed. The parent was obviously caught up in this thing that had told them that if they believed hard enough, they'd been working on their faith, exercising it pretty hard, but it didn't come in. It was not shaking their faith at all, though. This is the disturbing thing. After that, they looked at themselves and looked at the failure of the fact that they didn't get what they wanted and what they've been praying for and believing for because they had a lack of faith.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, when you were telling that story, I was, having a giggle until you said, and they were a single parent and struggling, and then it was like, okay, now it's sad, now it's tragic.
Yeah, it really was. And, this was someone I knew really well. And it was really difficult to watch. And, this same person, they got remarried, and everything was about better believing, having a better faith. working really hard at it. And when they used to have scriptures all over the house, they used to have a list of scriptures on the fridge that they would repeat over and over and over. And they were all about prosperity. They were all about victory. They were all about claiming and, the blood of Jesus over everything or whatever. There was lots and lots of that. And this new partner of this person, I don't think that was them. But it soon became them because there was a real pressure to conform to that. So they quite often would be dragged to the fridge to read out those scriptures. If they would exhibit any negativity, they had to repeat those scriptures, because if you repeat them over and over, you'll get better at it. You'll have a better, stronger faith.
Yeah, well, it really is the whole emperor. That emperor has no clothes, right? And the whole thing about that. That parable or that story was that you can see it's not working, but you dare not admit it, lest it, comes back on you because of peer pressure, that there's something wrong with you, that you are somehow in deficit. And that's what it came down to, wasn't it? It was like, the reason why it's not working is because you don't have enough faith, not because this is bullshit, not because the emperor has no clothes.
That's right. And, it does. And here's an environment that's meant to be supporting, loving, building people up, accepting them in grace and love. And all it does is really tear them down, because it tells them they're not good enough. If they don't win or get victory or become wealthier, then it's about them. It's about their failure, not about the fact that church or that body of people hasn't looked after a single parent, hasn't helped them out, hasn't guided them, hasn't said to them, hey, probably should stop giving away all your money and actually look after yourself, in the fact that you've got the ability to look after yourself. Don't make yourself on the bones of your ass by giving everything away. And that's what happened. They ended up on the bones of their ass.
Sure. I can remember when I was at Bible college, and realizing that this thing doesn't work. I was introduced to a book called Christianity in Crisis by a guy named Hank Hanegraaff. And it was written by conservative evangelicals, right? I mean, and they were, they've got their own issues, but nevertheless, at the time, I was a Bible believing Christian brother, and so it confronted me with, this is why this is not biblical, and this is why this is not spiritual. And then there was another book which preceded this, but I didn't read it in this order. And it was called A Different Gospel by this guy named D.R. McConnell. And he did this PhD paper. I think he was like at Oral Roberts University, which is, a hyper-Pentecostal place. And he basically showed how Kenneth Hagin had ripped off large amounts of another author named E.W. Kenyon, who was a sort of a positivity faith preacher, but he was a Baptist. And so he ripped off portions of this and said that the Lord had revealed this to him, or that angels had spoken to him, or Jesus had said this stuff to him. And then it was word for word, line for line out of E.W. Kenyon's books. Wow. So a lot of this faith stuff, if you trace it back to E.W. Kenyon, it just and he was influenced by Christian Science and positive thinking and all that kind of stuff, and so that's where it sort of came from. And so when I read that as a Bible believing Christian, I went, oh, okay, this is shit. So I was still in Great Big AOG when that happened, and then of course, true to T form, started telling people, did you know that this is shit and here's why? And of course, I started to lose friends. I started to be isolated by those pockets in the church, because they don't want to know. No. You're being anti-faith, brother. It's bad enough you go to Bible college and lose your faith, let alone, reading these books. But yeah, I lost friends.
You know why? Because you are forever the evangelist.
Well, that's
so. Right. This is true, and that's one thing I love about T is when T has a deep conviction on something, he wants you to hear why.
He starts a podcast.
He starts a podcast and he goes, hey, B, want to be on, do this podcast? I'm going, yeah, what the fuck?
You remember when I got right into Buddhism, I was telling you, saying, hey, here's why we should all meditate. Yep.
Yeah, and I mixed it up and I started medicating and wondered why it all went wrong.
You can do both. You can medicate and meditate. That's all right.
Yeah, true. Some people like yoga and meditation. I like yoga and medication, whatever.
But the thing is, it's again that same sort of, when you start to think for yourself, when you start to voice opposition to, within Pentecostalism, right? Not just the faith movement, but the faith movement's a prime example. When you start to voice opposition, you start to lose people. You start to lose friends. People ostracize you. People isolate you. People will even say, bad stuff about you. It's crazy.
Yeah, but what I reckon that is? I reckon part of that is it's very confronting when you start to provide a rationale of an alternate reality, and you've got something that says, if you don't believe hard enough, it's all about you, why you don't get what you want, then you've got to get rid of that. You've got to get rid of that negativity in your life, and you'll be seen as negative because you're affecting their opportunity. So I reckon they've got to cut you, and that's the reason. I think that's a rationale behind it.
Yeah, well, you're challenging their worldview, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah. I mean, as you and I know, if your worldview crumbles, it's painful. And I think maybe intuitively we know, well, this is actually threatening the very foundations of my worldview, and, better back off, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't. Both of us haven't really been involved in the space for quite a while, but I wonder if this hyperfaith movement is still something that's quite present, something that's quite influential. Yeah,
very much so. Oh, yeah, man. I see stuff on social media from time to time. So you've still got, Kenneth Copeland still running around. We saw him with the COVID thing, or heard him with the COVID thing a moment ago. You've got Joyce Meyer. Joel Osteen, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. He's another, and the one that I love, the best name for a faith preacher, is Creflo Dollar.
That was it. That was the one I was just going to bring up. Have you seen Creflo? I think it's like Creflo G Dollar, something like that.
Yeah, brilliant name, and he should be a doctor as well. He should be Dr. Dollar.
Pretty sure he is.
Yeah, that's right. He got his PhD from Kenneth Hagin's college. At the bottom of the Lucky Charms box.
You've got to love it. It is a frightening space, and these people are so influential. That's what frightens me. And there's a lot of people that really hang their hats on that. So it's a scary space. And for listeners who are out there, reach out, start talking amongst yourselves in the Facebook group. If this is something that you've got a little bit of baggage from, if you've got things that you need to bring up and talk, put them in there. Get some support from each other.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be a good conversation to sort of prompt. But look, at the end of the day, you're not alone. You know that anyway. We think it's shit. We worked out it was shit.
Like many things, I sort of just sat back and I just went, this doesn't feel right. I'm a very I rely upon my gut a lot, and intuition is something that I've relied upon a lot of my life. And there was something, I didn't get anchored in this. It wasn't something that really hooked me in. I gave it a crack, and I reckon it was maybe 6 to 12 months of my journey that I thought, I'll try this. And I remember coming out the other side of it going, that was just ridiculous. That was just stupid. And I had quite an objective view on it coming out the other side. But I think what helped me was seeing some people that were in my life being so incredibly involved in it, putting everything into it, like that person I spoke to before, and it getting nowhere. And I thought, this is just destructive. It's not really part of what really attracted me to the space in the first place, of that love, that grace, that acceptance, that community. It just didn't seem to marry up.
Yeah, well, like I said, for me, it was those books. People introduced me. Me, I can be very sort of cerebral, and so I had those books introduced to me. I read them, but I think the reason I was primed for accepting the books was the fact that I knew it wasn't working, and most of the people that were right into it were just odd. Like there was just a denial of reality. It wasn't just about the faith stuff. It was, so much. There was just a denial of reality. It teaches you to deny. And I think it's important to note that where we're coming from now is it's not about being anti-beliefs. If people want to believe stuff, they want to believe, John Paul, George and Ringo were in the Rolling Stones. I don't care. Believe what you want. But when it's destructive to people, when it's destructive to people's mental health, when it's destructive to their well-being, when it's putting people in financial dire straits, and then the preachers own 747 planes. Kenneth Copeland has an airport named after him where he lands his own 747s. As you said, John Avanzini took all those offerings. Then it's shit, and we need to just call it out. The emperor has no fucking clothes, and this is bad for people.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's it's frightening that it still exists. It's frightening that people haven't really cut it down and culled it. But I guess that's people just want to keep on believing. People just want something to be real, don't they?
Well, that's exactly right. Well, look, mate, on that positive note, we have come to the end of our time. And so I think we should wrap it there. Next week, we're going to look at evangelism. We're going to talk about winning souls and bringing people to the Lord, brother. I think it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, no, and I think we've both got like many things here. We've got different journeys, but also a convergence of some of those bits and pieces as well, which I think will resonate with people. So really looking forward to having a chat about that. And until then, we'll see you next week.
See you next week, people. Bye-bye.
See ya.